Good evening, everyone, and please welcome the microphone to the frame. People have been saying that I've been too quiet in some of my recent videos. I'm going to fix that by getting my recording device a little bit closer to the place where the sound comes from, my face. Hopefully it helps. Let's get into the topic of the video, though. So, I've been seeing a lot of misinformation floating about regarding the Nexus since the patch, because the patch did impact some Nexus blocking strategies, but to be entirely honest, it barely impacted them at all. Nexus blocking is still alive and well, and is not in fact gone. So, some background on how Nexus blocking works, just to bring everybody up to speed. Reward nodes will always follow a certain set of rules. Reward nodes will not spawn in such a way as to block an already placed passage. So that means if a reward node spawns here, it's going to be blocking a passage regardless. If it's pointing this way, it's blocking this passage. If it's pointing this way, it's blocking both of them, and so on. Abusing that, you can place pieces in such a fashion that they block a portion of your chart. So reward nodes cannot spawn all the way along here, and they cannot spawn all the way along here. Now, the thing that changed, there used to be an invisible wall that went this all of this way around your chart, and reward nodes were not allowed to spawn pointed into that wall. The wall is still there, presumably. It's just been stretched. It's way the heck out here now. However, that has not changed the distance at which rewards can spawn from your chart. They can still only spawn within this rectangle. So, if we take this blocking strategy that I have on this character as an example, that means that the sum difference between the amount of nodes blocked beforehand and the amount of nodes blocked afterwards is different only by 4. Because the only place where rewards can spawn now with the changed chart is in this corner, this corner, this corner, and this corner. And those are the only places they can spawn now that they couldn't before. So yes, Nexus blocking was minorly nerfed by the most recent change, but it is in no way at all dead. That's, if you wanted to just take this strategy and update it, you need to place 4 additional pieces. That's all, in those 4 exact spots. And then you'd be blocked slightly less efficiently than before, but you'd have just as much of your chart blocked as you did before the change. Now, into why I think this change happened. And in this section, we're going to be addressing a little bit some of the responses to the change, because I've seen a lot of people very angry about the fact that this information was withheld from us. And while I certainly don't condone that in terms of practices from grinding gear games, I think it's one of the more questionable things that they do. For instance, look at the fact that your syndicate chart resets, even though in the patch notes, was it the patch notes or no, it was a manifesto, they said they wouldn't cause that to happen. Then they went back and edited it without any fanfare, and so it was implemented in the core game and blindsided a lot of folks like me. I'm really not a big fan of that. I want any significant change to be communicated clearly. But here, I don't think that it was intended to have any sort of effect on Nexus blocking strategies, and I think it was just pushed through without thinking through the effects it might have on Nexus blocking strategies. In this case, I really don't think it was any sort of intentional. In fact, I think I know what it was meant to solve. So there's an issue that can arise sometimes on your chart where you have 4 reward nodes. Let's take a look at these 4 as an example, since they're actually perfectly positioned. And you have those 4 reward nodes, and they all happen to spawn pointing in at the same square where this amplifier is. If that happens to you, you cannot access any of those nodes, because you obviously can't path into the square without going through one of the squares they occupy, but you can't do that because they're all pointing inwards, so you can't reach the passages that you need to actually access that reward. And in the first big patch, they fixed 80, maybe 85% of the cases of that happening, because they seem to have fixed it for pieces floating in the middle by just making it so that no more than 3 passages from reward nodes can be pointing at a certain spot. So whenever a reward node goes to spawn, it probably just checks, all right, if I'm going to put my passage in this direction, how many other passages are already pointing at this spot? If answer more than 3, don't point at that spot. And then you never have 4 pointing in the same direction. You can always, through some means, access the reward nodes, even if you have to, specifically do one first, and then you can reach the other 3, which is annoying, but not impossible. Now, what if we take this same situation and we move it down 1 to where the invisible wall would have been before? Well, then something interesting happens, because then if this one in the corner or this one in this corner is the last one to spawn, and we assume that the check that it has when it spawns, that it's not allowed to point at a wall, supersedes the check that it's not allowed to have more than 3 pointing in a certain direction from, total rewards around that point, then it's possible that it would decide, okay, it's better for me to point towards the same square as 3 others than it is for me to point at the wall. It depends on, how the coding goes for how they actually spawn. But if that's the case, then that would mean that sets of 4 nodes that are spawning right next to a wall could theoretically still brick a node, or brick 4 reward nodes on your chart. And how do you fix that? Well, you have a few options, but one of them is move the walls really far away from where the pieces can spawn. That's what they did. And yeah, it minorly affected some Nexus blocking strategies. But was it intended as a way to destroy Nexus blocking? Was this an underhanded move by Grinding Gear Game to remove fun from the video? No, this was developers, most likely on a bit of a clock, trying with most likely limited resources, since they're probably working on the next league, to fix a problem that was bricking people's charts. And in doing so, they happened to affect a obscure part of the endgame that probably maybe 5 to 10% of the player base is taking advantage of, in the form of Nexus blocking, if that. So, while I certainly am disappointed that there was no mention at all of a change to the Nexus in the patch notes, even if it wasn't a pointed mention towards Nexus blocking, but rather just, we've made the chart bigger, just put that in, something to mention that it's going to happen. A little bit of empathy in approaching the situation for the people who are, fixing these problems, I think is probably warranted. And that's really all I wanted to say. So, yeah, I hope this was informative. Nexus blocking isn't dead, and I'll see you guys in the next video.